On a silent Christmas Eve, a lonely police officer stumbled upon a battered German shepherd digging for scraps behind a shuttered bakery, neither of them knowing that this chance meeting would unravel a secret and ignite a healing neither believed possible. As their lives slowly intertwined through scars, silence, and the weight of memory, each small act of kindness began to mend wounds that no one else could see. Would you have opened your door to a wounded stranger on the coldest night of the year? Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And have you ever found hope in the most unlikely place? Stay with us to the end, because this story will remind you that even in our loneliest moments, a quiet miracle may be waiting just outside your door. Let us know in the comments if you believe in second chances, and don't forget to share your story after you hear this one. Snow had been falling since late afternoon, soft and unhurried, draping Bar Harbor in a hush so complete that even the ocean seemed to retreat beneath its own silence. On Christmas Eve, the town wore a borrowed warmth, porch lights blinking in the mist, window panes etched with frost, distant silhouettes moving behind curtains as families gathered in golden-lit kitchens. Out on the edge of all that comfort, the world felt emptier, the cold pressing closer. Sawyer Clark drove slowly through the deserted streets, the tires of his patrol car crunching over ice patches and slush. His uniform jacket fit tighter across his shoulders these days, as if the fabric resisted settling onto new bones. The radio played a distant carol, tinny and brittle, before he turned it off. He preferred the sound of his own breath, the soft shiver of air against the windshield, the pulse of his heartbeat as he moved through the sleeping town. He passed the old church on Main, its steeple hidden behind wind-whipped pines, then the shuttered bookstore, its door still decorated with a faded wreath from a season that had come and gone too quickly. Everything felt muted, like an old photograph washed in blue. He thought of his daughter asleep 2 towns away, the sound of her laughter trapped in the memory of a warmer summer. Tonight, the ache of missing her settled over him like a second skin. On the corner of Tide Street, the only sign of life flickered from the window of Maple and Tide. The bakery closed hours ago, but its scent lingered ghostly in the winter air. Cinnamon, sugar, bread rising against the dark. Sawyer's foot eased off the gas, a quiet instinct guiding him to the curb. A movement caught his eye beside the dumpster behind the bakery, something low to the ground, shifting with quiet purpose, half-shadowed by the rusted lid. He sat for a moment, the engine idling, watching. Not a raccoon, not a fox, either. The shape was too big, too deliberate. There was a tension in its body, the kind that spoke of cold and hunger and too many nights spent hiding from things that could not be reasoned with. As the headlights caught it, the creature froze, head lowered, paws buried in a torn trash bag, as if the world beyond that moment did not exist. Sawyer switched off the engine and reached for his gloves. He stepped out into the night, the cold biting instantly at his cheeks and ears. The street behind him was silent, except for the wind rattling an empty soda can across the asphalt. He closed the car door gently, careful not to startle whatever waited in the darkness. His boots pressed into the crust of snow, each step sending up a whisper of ice crystals that sparkled beneath the streetlight. A few paces closer, he could see it clearly now. A German shepherd, fur long and tangled, coat marked by patches of dirt and old scars. One ear stood upright, the other torn at the edge. Its ribs showed beneath the black and tan of its coat, each breath visible in the cold. The dog moved with the caution of something that had learned too well the cost of trust. Between its teeth, A strip of faded red cloth hung like a talisman. Sawyer stopped a good distance away, not wanting to crowd the animal. He knelt slowly, one knee in the snow, hands visible at his sides. The wind lifted the edge of his jacket, carrying the scent of leather and salt from the bay. The dog watched him, eyes amber dark, wide, reflecting every motion. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Just the hush of falling snow, the hum of distant waves. Two lives paused at the very edge of something neither could name. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a half-stale roll from the bakery's last delivery. He set it gently on the ground and slid it forward. His hand shook a little, maybe from the cold, maybe from the ache that never quite left his chest. He had not shared a meal with anyone in months. The dog didn't move, nose twitching, eyes never leaving Sawyer's face. In that fragile space between hunger and hesitation, something like understanding began to grow. Sawyer leaned back, giving ground, willing the dog to come closer on its own terms. The shepherd crept forward, inch by inch, paws splaying in the snow, flanks trembling. It sniffed the bread, then, with a careful swipe of its tongue, took it into its jaws. Crumbs fell onto the snow, the dog eating in small, deliberate motions, as if each bite were a promise it might have to give back. Sawyer sat there, breath rising in clouds, watching. He noticed the scar that ran along the dog's left shoulder, a jagged seam where fur would never fully grow again. His own palm curled instinctively, remembering the white scar across his own hand, a remnant from a night he rarely spoke of. Pain found pain quietly. Above them, the world continued, lights glowing, families singing, a town untouched by the silent meeting in the alley. The only sounds were the dog's teeth crunching, the slow exhale of Sawyer's breath, and the soft, persistent snow. When the bread was gone, the shepherd did not run. It lowered itself onto the snow, tucking paws beneath its chest, still watching him. Between them, the red scrap of fabric glowed against the white, a thread tying together past and present, fear and the faintest hope. Sawyer slid off his jacket and wordlessly placed it on the ground, a few feet away from the dog. Not an order, not a gift. Just an offering, a place to rest, if rest was what was needed. The shepherd did not move at first, only turned its gaze to the fabric, then to the man, then back to the fabric. He didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. Sometimes, on a night like this, the only thing you could do was be there, in the cold, in the dark, with a stranger who, in their own way, was just as lost as you. Snow fell harder, thickening the air, softening the harsh lines of the alley, tucking away the world's harshness beneath a gentle, forgiving shroud. Sawyer stayed there, waiting, patient, still, quietly breathing beside the life that tonight needed nothing but the simple grace of not being alone. The wind picked up after midnight, rattling the metal trash bin and sighing through the tight alley. Sawyer sat quietly in the snow, knees damp, breath slowing with each exhale. Streetlights painted long shadows on the brick, their golden halos flickering in the shifting gusts. In that hush, time stretched, minutes curling around themselves, neither man nor dog eager to move first, both reluctant to break a silence that somehow felt like shelter. He looked at the shepherd, and the shepherd looked back. The dog's head dipped lower, muzzle close to the soiled crust of bread now gone, tongue tracing the last memory of warmth. Up close, Sawyer could see the roughness of the animal's coat, the way old injuries had never fully healed. Skin tugged tight where the fur parted at the left shoulder. A stark, pale scar that told of some long-ago pain. The mark of teeth or steel, a memory that had never let go. The dog's eyes caught the weak yellow of the street lamp. There was wariness there, a shimmer of pain, but something more. A watchfulness that bordered on hope. In the soft dark, the shepherd's ribs rose and fell beneath a pelt that had once gleamed. Beneath one paw, pinched between blunt claws, was the tattered red scrap, thin as a ribbon, frayed at the ends, edges browned by age and dirt. Even as the dog rested, it never let the cloth stray far. Sawyer wondered about that piece of fabric. It looked out of place, as if it belonged to a different story, one that had started far away and long ago. He had seen working dogs with keepsakes before, a toy, a glove, sometimes a collar from an old friend or a lost home. The red scrap was no collar, but the way the dog held it, jaw tense, paw braced, suggested it was the only thing that had endured through the storms and hunger and countless nights beneath strange roofs. He remembered how, as a boy, he'd carried his father's wool cap everywhere after the accident, sleeping with it at his side until the scent faded and his mother quietly washed it one day, ending one small ritual of grief. Now, at 33, Sawyer felt the sharpness of old sorrow press against the newer aches inside him, the raw edge of a recent divorce, the ache of holidays spent alone, the wound of missing his daughter, a longing that sat heavy on his chest and never seemed to let up. A car passed at the end of the street, tires hissing on ice, headlights sweeping and gone. Neither Sawyer nor the dog flinched. The world spun on, oblivious to their small communion at the edge of the town's warmth. He reached back, feeling the scar along his palm, a white seam raised just enough to catch the winter air. It was from a broken bottle, years before, a night when he'd intervened in a fight outside the old bar on the wharf. The pain had faded, but the mark remained, an invisible thread that tied him to every choice he'd ever made to step between hurt and the ones who couldn't defend themselves. Sawyer's breath fogged the air as he moved to the trunk of his cruiser, quietly unlatching it. The shepherd tensed, body ready to flee, but Sawyer kept his movements slow and careful, every gesture offered like a question rather than a command. From a faded grocery sack, he took a hard, crusted roll, the sort that never seemed to go stale, always left over from patrol breakfasts, and broke it into smaller pieces. He placed one on the ground, not far from the dog, and then, mindful, unhurried, sat again at a distance, hands open in his lap. His posture said what words could not. "I am not here to harm you. Take what you need. I'll wait." The shepherd inched forward, hunger overcoming caution for a moment. He didn't look directly at Sawyer. Instead, he kept his eyes low, posture wary, movements measured and almost formal, as if afraid too much eagerness might snap whatever fragile truce had been struck in the snow. He took the bread and retreated a step, chewing slowly, one ear twitching in the cold. In the warm lamplight, Sawyer saw the dog's chest rise and fall, steadying with each swallow, that red cloth still pressed against the ground beneath him, as if the animal's heart was tethered to it, afraid that if he let it go, nothing would anchor him to this moment, this place, this silent offer of companionship. Sawyer studied the shepherd's eyes, the way they flickered with pain and uncertainty. He recognized it. The same look he had seen in the mirror, morning after morning, since the house had grown empty, and his daughter's laughter had become a memory that echoed down 2 long hallways. No words passed between them. None were needed. Only the hush of snow falling, the distant roll of the bay, and the shared knowledge that both had lost something they would never quite regain. He felt the cold seep through his pants, into his bones, but he did not move. It was enough tonight, simply to sit here, watching over this wounded creature, offering what little comfort he could without expectations or demands. He knew the value of silence, the way it let grief breathe, the way it gave pain room to settle, and maybe in time to soften. The shepherd finished eating, then looked up at Sawyer for the briefest of moments. It was not gratitude, not quite. More an acknowledgement. "I see you. I know you're here." Sawyer nodded, his breath trembling. Then, slowly, as if rehearsed, he reached into his jacket and produced a thin, knitted glove. He placed it in the snow near the shepherd, another offering, not of food but of warmth, a small sign that even a stranger could care for what was broken. The shepherd did not move, but his paw, scarred and battered, shifted ever so slightly closer to the glove. A tiny gesture, easily missed, but to Sawyer it was everything. Above them, the snow fell thicker, the world growing quieter, the space between 2 wounded souls filled not with words, but with a patient, fragile hope. The snowfall softened overnight, turning the alley into a white corridor where every sound dissolved before it could travel. Sawyer stayed near the shepherd, the hush stretching between them like a woolen blanket, heavy, protective, a comfort born of shared solitude. Time moved differently out here, beneath the dim street lamp and the swirl of snowflakes. No schedule, no patrol calls, no lists of wrongs to make right. Only the slow breathing of man and dog, marking the minutes with patience. He settled on the curb, boots flat in the snow, arms resting loosely on his knees. The cold seeped up through the soles, biting at his toes, but he didn't shift. The shepherd, Harper, though the name hadn't been spoken or claimed yet, remained curled around the scrap of red fabric, muscles taut but no longer trembling. The dog's eyes, once darting and restless, now softened with the drowsy heaviness of an animal whose fear was giving way to exhaustion. Above them, Christmas lights blinked from the windows of distant houses, out of reach, like signals from a world that had moved on. Sawyer watched them and felt that old ache, the sharp longing for what he no longer had, the dull ache for what might never return. He thought of his daughter's room, half empty now, the echo of her voice drifting through the house like the memory of a song he could almost remember but never quite sing. Snow gathered in gentle mounds on Harper's back, clinging to the coarse fur and the notched edge of his left ear. The dog didn't shake it off. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, nostrils flaring, chest rising with a deeper breath. Sawyer wondered if the animal was dreaming, if memories flickered in his mind, of mountain wind, of a voice calling from far away, of running through drifts with purpose and pride. There was a peace in Harper's posture, a kind of acceptance that came not from trust, but from a surrender to the moment. As if for now, this quiet curb, this stranger's steady presence, was enough. Sawyer reached out, not to touch, but to rest his hand on the cold concrete a few inches from Harper's paws. He felt the sting in his knuckles, the numbness creeping up his wrists. It reminded him of the long hours on the water, rowing against the morning tide, before the sun broke over the Atlantic and painted everything with a fragile gold. Those dawns had felt like forgiveness, small and fleeting, but real enough to make the day possible. In that spirit, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it over the edge of the curb, letting it fall into the snow beside Harper. Not an invitation, not a command, just a silent offering, a gesture that spoke of care without words. The shepherd opened one eye, nostrils twitching, then, after a long, deliberate pause, shifted his weight, inching closer to the warmth. He didn't claim the jacket, didn't burrow in as a house pet might, but he allowed it to rest beside him, accepted its presence, its heat. Sometimes that was as close as you could come to trust. Sawyer pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them. He let his mind wander to the kitchen at home, to the hum of the old fridge, the silence after midnight, the mug of tea left cooling by the window. He missed the sound of small feet padding down the hall, the bright voice calling him for pancakes, the weight of a child's head on his shoulder. He missed having someone to worry about, someone to look after. The shepherd shifted again, pushing the red cloth into a small nest beneath his chin, then laying his head down, ears flicking at the night's stray sounds. Sawyer watched the dogs breathing slow, the ribs rising and falling, each exhale clouding in the cold. It struck him then how alike they were, two creatures holding on to scraps of a past life, unsure how to let go but too tired to keep running. He glanced at his phone, the screen aglow with missed calls, unread messages, holiday greetings from colleagues, a photo from his ex-wife, their daughter grinning, front teeth missing, clutching a new book. He stared at the picture for a long time, thumb tracing the edge of the screen before locking it and slipping the phone back into his pocket. The night deepened. Around them, the town's heart slowed, doors locked, and lights dimmed. Sawyer stood slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. He shook out another piece of bread, left it near the shepherd's paws. Then, without a word, he moved to the side of the alley and leaned against the wall, letting the cold seep into his bones. He would keep watch just for a while until the darkness thinned and the world felt safe again. Harper didn't move, but when Sawyer glanced over, he saw that the shepherd's eyes were half open, watching him in turn. There was a question there, a silent wondering. Who are you, and why have you not left? He didn't answer. Instead, he took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the sharpness of winter, letting it burn away the worst of his loneliness. The quiet stretched on, unbroken and kind. Somewhere in the night, a bell rang, a faint peal from the church at the center of town, marking the hour with gentle certainty. Sawyer listened, heart steadying to the rhythm of those distant chimes. He felt the possibility of hope, fragile as frost on glass, settling in the small space between him and the wounded shepherd beside him. Two souls in the snow, sharing nothing but silence and the slow, cautious beginning of belonging. The alley slowly faded from darkness as a faint blue-gray light seeped into the spaces between houses. Christmas morning arrived in Bar Harbor with a hush, no trumpets or laughter, only the slow retreat of night and the quiet shimmer of snow still falling. Sawyer shifted his stiff legs, rising from the curb as the cold in his muscles reminded him how long he'd stayed. His hands were raw, face red from wind and sleep deprivation, but something in him felt strangely settled. He glanced over to Harper, who lay curled tightly, chin on paws, still clutching that strip of red fabric against his chest. A passing truck rumbled down Main, its headlights sweeping the edge of the alley, but neither man nor dog stirred. The town was waking gently, porch lights flicking on, the smell of chimney smoke and distant cinnamon drifting in the frozen air. Sawyer knew he couldn't stay here forever. He gathered his jacket, brushing snow from its lining, and squatted low so his face was level with Harper's. For a moment, he waited, silent, patient, letting the dog sense his intention. No words, just the unspoken hope that Harper would let him close. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled treat from the station, and placed it in his gloved palm. Harper's ears flicked, but he didn't retreat. He sniffed the air, then stretched his neck, accepting the treat without a growl or flinch. Sawyer took that as permission. Moving slowly, he eased the leash from his belt, leaving it slack and open on the ground between them. He wouldn't use it, not yet, but he let it lie there, a symbol of trust offered, not imposed. The world brightened a few shades, frost on the dumpsters sparkling like scattered diamonds. Sawyer's patrol car sat just a dozen yards away, windshield coated in a thick crust of ice. He hesitated, then spoke quietly, his words little more than a whisper meant for himself as much as for the dog. "Let's get you warm." Harper didn't answer, but he stood, stretching with the stiff, careful movements of an animal unused to comfort. He paused to gather the red cloth in his mouth, the leash left untouched. Then, as if weighed down by the gravity of decision, he followed Sawyer toward the car, one hesitant step after another, leaving only faint tracks behind. Sawyer opened the back door, rearranged his old blanket across the seat, and let Harper climb in without coaxing. For a brief second, their eyes met in the car's reflection, man and dog, both battered, both searching for shelter from the cold. Then Sawyer shut the door gently, started the engine, and let the heat begin its slow work. The drive through the morning streets felt dreamlike. Bar Harbor's storefronts glistened beneath garlands, but few people were out. Sawyer steered carefully, glancing at Harper in the rearview mirror. The shepherd sat upright at first, posture taut, then finally settled into the makeshift nest of blanket, eyes half closed as the warmth crept in. At the station, Sawyer parked in the far lot, away from the others who might already be trickling in. He slipped inside through the side entrance, motioning for Harper to follow. The old building carried the scent of burnt coffee and lemon-scented cleaner, a comfort he had never named, but which felt like home in the oddest way. He led Harper into the break room, flipped the switch on the electric kettle, and laid out another blanket beside the radiator. Harper sniffed the space, circled once, then settled, curling so that the red cloth was shielded beneath his chest, as if it could still protect him from any new pain. Sawyer poured hot water into his battered mug, hands trembling with the aftershocks of a sleepless night. He sat in the old wooden chair by the window, watching Harper as dawn spilled through the blinds. The world outside was silent, but for the occasional cry of a gull, the distant bark of another dog somewhere blocks away. He sipped his tea, letting the steam sting his eyes, his body finally relaxing in the heavy warmth. He didn't try to touch Harper, didn't call for him or offer comfort he wasn't sure would be welcome. Instead, he watched as the shepherd drifted toward sleep, ears drooping, breath evening out, the steady rise and fall of his chest growing softer with every minute. Sawyer allowed himself to close his eyes, just for a moment, his hand resting on the table, palm open as if waiting for something that might never arrive. Time became water. Sawyer floated in and out of shallow dreams. His daughter's voice, the echo of Christmases past, the feel of sand between his toes at low tide, the ache of a body learning how to rest again. In the half-sleep, he heard Harper whimper softly, legs twitching, chasing something in memory or nightmare. The sound cut through the fog, and Sawyer opened his eyes, heart squeezed by the familiar ache of helplessness. He stayed still, letting Harper settle, not interrupting the dog's silent battle. Outside, the world continued, snow drifting in waves against the window, car tires crunching along the road, a distant bell from the old church. When Harper finally stilled, breath deep and steady, Sawyer let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The first light of Christmas Day crept along the linoleum floor, catching the battered collar around Harper's neck. As the shepherd lifted his head, Sawyer noticed, barely visible against the worn leather, a faded tag, the numbers almost worn away, and beneath them a line etched in shaky script. "Bring him home, Vermont." Sawyer sat back in the quiet, the meaning of the words slowly sinking in. He let his eyes rest on Harper, on the red cloth, on the fragile sense of safety in this tiny room. All the hurt, the loss, the longing, they were still there. But for this morning, in this warmth, they felt lighter, as if some old burden had shifted, just enough for hope to slip in with the light. The sun finally broke above the harbor, gilding the frost on the glass, and the world, for a moment, was nothing but silence, breath, and the small, brave miracle of two broken beings surviving the night together. The sun climbed reluctantly above Bar Harbor that morning, slow to warm the icy town. Pale light slipped across the station's kitchen tiles, making dust motes dance over Harper's sleeping form. Sawyer moved quietly, brewing a new pot of coffee, careful not to disturb the shepherd curled beside the radiator. He watched the dog's chest rise and fall, a rhythm that had, overnight, become familiar. Each exhale a small release, each inhale a quiet promise that the day might be a little less hard. He glanced again at the battered collar, the almost illegible tag. "Bring him home, Vermont." Something in those words tugged at the old ache he carried, the sense that both man and dog had wandered too far from where they belonged. He sat at the table, coffee cooling between his palms, mind moving through half-remembered stories of rescue dogs, missing animals, and the vast, wild country north of Maine. After breakfast, Sawyer stepped into his office, a small room with a window looking out over the frosted evergreens. He tapped at his keyboard, searching lost dog reports from Vermont, combing through rescue group forums, old news clippings, and scattered notes in databases that rarely gave up anything quickly. Harper's name wasn't there at first, but as Sawyer narrowed the dates and cross-referenced working dogs gone missing in the region, a pattern began to form. He found fragments, a mention in a mountain rescue blog, a photo of a German shepherd with a handler in a red scarf, posted over a year ago. There was a story, too, buried in the archives, a mudslide in the Green Mountains, a young woman missing, her search dog last seen running into the storm. After that, the trail went cold. Sawyer sat back, breath catching in his chest. He studied the faded printout, the handler's name, Claire Dalton. Her face smiled from the page, wind-chapped cheeks, dark hair tied in a knot. The dog at her side looked just like Harper, younger, unscarred, eyes bright with purpose. He imagined the world they must have shared, snowfields and mountain air, the crisp snap of twigs underfoot, the silent language of trust built over countless rescues. He left the file open and slipped on his coat. Harper stirred at the sound, eyes tracking his movements, but body slow to rise. Sawyer kneeled, hand open, waiting. Harper approached with caution, nose twitching at the familiar scent. When Sawyer rose, Harper followed. No command needed, just a quiet understanding that today they would move together. Outside, Bar Harbor glimmered with the pale blue of late morning. Sidewalks dusted with salt and snow, shop windows fogged from the warmth inside. The two of them walked slowly toward the harbor. Sawyer's pace matched to Harper's tentative gait. As they passed Maple and Tide, the bakery's owner, Mrs. Whitaker, waved from behind the glass, her gesture small, gentle, the way people in small towns learn to acknowledge hurt without prying. At the water's edge, the sea was a plate of pewter, waves hushed by the weight of ice. Sawyer found a quiet place among the pines, far from the clatter of the town. He sat on a fallen log, pulling his knees to his chest, while Harper circled in widening spirals, nose low, tail swaying, stopping now and then to sniff at the wind. There was a stillness in the world, the kind that made each heartbeat feel like a new beginning. Sawyer watched the shepherd explore, the way he paused at every sound, a gull's cry, the crack of a distant branch. He wondered what memories lived inside that battered frame, how many nights spent searching, how many people pulled from the snow by teeth and grit, how many goodbyes left unsaid. He thought of his own life, too, of loss and starting over, of finding meaning in small acts, pouring coffee, mending a fence, sharing silence with a creature who had nothing left to prove. Back at the station, Sawyer sat at his desk, composing an email to the Vermont Mountain Rescue. The words came haltingly at first. How do you explain a miracle returned? He attached the photo of Harper, careful to capture the dog's scarred profile, the scrap of red cloth held gently in his jaws. He wrote about finding Harper on Christmas Eve, about the tag, about the sense that this dog was searching for more than just food or warmth. He sent the message into the ether, not expecting a reply but needing to honor the hope that had begun to grow inside him. That evening, as twilight crept across the town, Sawyer took Harper down to the shoreline once more. The cold was sharper now, the world painted in silver and blue. Harper moved with greater confidence, his body looser, tail no longer tucked, but carried low in a gesture of cautious acceptance. Sawyer picked up a piece of driftwood, tossing it gently into the surf. Harper watched it go, then padded after it, the red cloth bobbing from his mouth, his paws marking new prints in the wet sand. Sawyer smiled, something tight in his chest loosening. He didn't speak, there was no need. The healing here was quiet, layered in gestures and glances, in the simple act of being together on a lonely shore. When they returned home, Harper settled at the foot of Sawyer's bed, head resting on the old jacket. Sawyer lay awake for a while, listening to the steady rhythm of Harper's breath mingling with the wind against the window. He closed his eyes, letting hope gather in the quiet, letting the past loosen its grip just enough for morning to find them both. The New Year's chill settled into Bar Harbor with a steadiness that could not be hurried. For several days after Christmas, life fell into a kind of gentle routine. Mornings arrived quietly, Sawyer rising early, the house steeped in blue-gray light, the kettle hissing and clattering on the stove. Harper, at first, would wake tense, body braced as if expecting a summons that never came. But slowly, as the days blended together, his sleep grew deeper, his movements slower, his trust just a shade less cautious. The tag on Harper's collar remained a small riddle in Sawyer's mind. He checked his email each morning with an odd mixture of hope and resignation, scanning the inbox for an answer he half expected would never come. Most days, there was nothing but store ads, notes from colleagues, a new message from his ex-wife, his daughter smiling, missing teeth and all, bundled in pink by a sled. He always replied, always asked after her, though he never said much about his own days. It was the third morning after Christmas when Sawyer found the subject line waiting. Inquiry about a lost dog. Urgent response from Vermont Mountain Rescue. His pulse thudded in his chest. He sat at the kitchen table. Harper curled on the rug at his feet, the red cloth tucked beneath one massive paw. The email was brief but heavy. Thank you for reaching out. We believe the dog in your photo is Harper, formerly handled by Claire Dalton. Claire was a volunteer on our mountain rescue team. She and Harper worked together for 3 years. Claire was lost during a mudslide last winter. Harper was last seen searching for her in the snow. Despite efforts, neither returned. Until your message, we thought Harper was lost as well. There was more. A scan of an old photo attached. Harper younger, eyes bright, standing tall beside a woman in a red scarf. Claire's smile was wide and open, her gloved hand resting lightly on the shepherd's shoulder. The note continued. Claire always wore a red scarf on rescues. She called it her lucky charm. We believe the cloth in your photo may be from that scarf. Please, if you have more information, or if Harper is able, we would be honored to reconnect with him, if only to say goodbye. Sawyer stared at the screen until the letters blurred. He felt the smallness of his kitchen, the hush of the morning, the weight of stories unfinished. He looked down at Harper, who slept untroubled for once, the red scrap pressed against his nose as if to keep the scent alive. That day moved slowly, everything colored by the knowledge of what the cloth meant. Sawyer didn't rush the news. He didn't call, didn't write back immediately. Instead, he spent the morning at home, his movements gentle and deliberate. He brewed coffee, set an extra slice of bread on a plate, and sat beside Harper on the floor, their shoulders touching. He turned the tag in his fingers, feeling the worn edges, the barely there script. He tried to imagine the journey. Vermont's deep woods, the sudden roar of earth sliding loose, Claire's call lost in the storm. A dog left to search, then left behind, wandering through cold and hunger, carrying only a shred of fabric, the last thing that smelled like home. Sawyer glanced at the photograph again, then at Harper's battered frame. The shepherd looked back with the steady, solemn gaze of one who had seen too much. There was a sadness there, but also a quiet strength, the kind forged only in the crucible of loss. He attached the picture to the fridge, beneath a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, too. The image stood next to a drawing from his daughter, a stick figure family in bright crayon, a dog leaping in the sun. 2 worlds, both unfinished, both longing for someone who wouldn't walk through the door again. Later, Sawyer took Harper for a walk along the edge of the woods. Snow drifted through the pines, muffling the world in white. He let the shepherd set the pace, each step unhurried, paws crunching in the frost. Harper kept close to his side, sometimes pushing his nose against Sawyer's hand, sometimes stopping to listen to the silence. At the top of a low hill, they paused. Sawyer knelt, running his gloved fingers through Harper's fur, feeling the warmth beneath the thick ruff. He let the dog lean into him. the contact saying what neither could express. Thank you for not turning away, for not asking for more than I can give. Back home, Sawyer sat at the kitchen table, the letter from Vermont open in front of him, the photo propped beside his mug. He thought of what it meant to lose someone and still carry their memory. A scarf, a voice, a habit of looking back before closing a door. He wrote a reply, slow and careful, sharing what little he knew. Harper is safe, though scarred. He carries Claire's red scarf everywhere. He found me on Christmas Eve, and since then, we've both found a little more peace. I think he's ready to remember, not just survive. As dusk crept in, Sawyer turned off the lights, letting the house settle into shadows. He sat on the floor, Harper beside him, the red cloth between them, a thread from another life, a story that had almost vanished. In the hush, with only the steady breath of the shepherd for company, Sawyer felt the old wounds shift. Not healed, not gone, but less sharp, softened by the grace of a dog who had come so far, and the simple act of bearing witness to another's pain. Snow fell steadily over Bar Harbor, smoothing the town's rough edges beneath a new layer of quiet. The holidays slipped away in a series of gray mornings, each day settling into small, hard-won rituals. Sawyer rising early, Harper waiting by the door, both of them adjusting, in ways large and small, to sharing their separate solitudes. It was during one of these ordinary mornings, a Tuesday with no promise in its sky, that the rhythm changed. Sawyer was drinking coffee by the window, watching a plow carve slow furrows down Maple Street, when a knock rattled the glass of the station's front door. Harper, ever alert now, lifted his head, ears flicking. The shepherd's body tensed, sensing a shift in the air. Sawyer opened the door to a man who looked older than the snow itself. Heavy coat, salt and pepper beard, eyes raw with a kind of grief that had never fully set. He introduced himself, Mr. Dalton. His voice cracked around the syllables, but he carried himself with a dignity that made Sawyer want to stand straighter in his presence. I heard from the rescue team, the man said softly. About Harper. Sawyer led him inside, offered coffee, and gestured for him to sit. Mr. Dalton sat, hands knotted in his lap. There was a quiet desperation in the way he watched Harper, who had taken up his usual post by the radiator, red cloth still pressed beneath a paw. For a moment, the old man said nothing, just looked, his eyes traveling over the dog's scars, the gray in his muzzle, the cautious slowness in every movement. He was my daughter's, Mr. Dalton finally managed, voice catching on the words. Claire. She loved him more than she loved anything. He took a slow breath. When she went missing, I hoped maybe Harper had survived. Sometimes I thought I saw him, in dreams or out in the fields. He stopped, knuckles white. When your letter came, I had to come see for myself. Sawyer sat beside him, quiet, letting the story come as it would. He watched Harper, whose body had gone still, eyes wide and uncertain. The shepherd's gaze flicked from the old man to Sawyer, then to the red cloth, as if he were sorting through memories too tangled to speak aloud. I'd like to bring him home, Mr. Dalton said. Back to Vermont. Claire's resting there. It's where he belongs. The words hung in the air. Sawyer felt them land, a clean, heavy weight. He thought of Harper's journey, the winter roads, the search for warmth, the small acts of trust that had built, brick by brick, a fragile peace between them. He looked at the shepherd, who now stood, tail low, body tense, moving toward the door and then back again, as if caught between the past and the present. Sawyer did not answer right away. Instead, he knelt beside Harper, letting his hand rest gently atop the dog's head. Harper leaned in, but only for a heartbeat. Then he circled away, restless, nose pressed to the door as if searching for a scent only he could recognize. For the next hours, the station filled with a hush, broken only by the sounds of living. The old man's quiet sobs, the whir of the radiator, the scrape of Harper's nails on the floor. There were no demands, no sudden gestures, only the slow, aching rhythm of waiting. Sawyer made tea, set a bowl of water out for Harper, cleared away old reports from the table. Each action was deliberate, each gesture a small kindness, something to fill the emptiness that words could not reach. Harper spent most of the afternoon pacing the small space, sometimes pausing beside Mr. Dalton, sometimes coming to Sawyer's side, sometimes lying by the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. His breathing grew fast, then slow, then fast again, as if he too was struggling to decide where he belonged. As dusk fell, Sawyer took Harper outside, boots crunching on the new snow. They walked in silence through the empty lot, the town growing soft and golden behind frosted glass. Harper stayed close at first, then pulled away, circling back to the front steps, ears pricked, waiting for Sawyer to unlock the door. Inside, Sawyer watched Harper curl up beside the radiator once more, the red cloth gathered beneath his muzzle. For a long time he said nothing, just watched the dog sleep, body tight as if bracing for an old hurt. Mr. Dalton sat quietly nearby, his hand resting on the photo of Claire and Harper that Sawyer had printed from the email. Night deepened. Sawyer washed the mugs, straightened the chairs, folded a fresh blanket for Harper's bed. He did all the small things he could think of to soften the edges of the moment, actions that spoke of care where words failed. He knew that trust, once broken, does not return all at once. He saw it in Harper's every glance, uncertainty, longing, and the fear of being left behind yet again. He saw it, too, in the way Mr. Dalton clung to the hope that love might be enough to call a wounded creature home. In the hush of that evening, as snow pressed against the window and the old radiator ticked and hummed, the three of them, man, dog, and the shadow of a girl now gone, waited for the night to bring its answer. Nothing rushed, nothing decided, just the ache of letting go and the fragile, stubborn hope that some ties, though tested, might yet hold. The first flakes of a new storm began drifting down as Sawyer sat in the half-light, shoulders hunched by the window, fingers curled around a chipped mug that had gone cold. The station was almost silent now. Only the faint click of the radiator and Harper's quiet breathing broke the hush. Mr. Dalton had dozed off in the visitor's chair, his hand still clutching the photograph of Claire and Harper, head bowed as if listening for a voice just beyond the edge of dreams. Outside, the world retreated into gray. Wind pressed against the windows, carrying the low whistle of snow swirling along the harbor's edge. Sawyer let his eyes wander the room, Harper's blanket bunched up by the radiator, the half-finished mug of tea on the table, the small red scrap, Claire's scarf, still pressed beneath Harper's chin. He wondered, not for the first time, what it meant to be enough for someone. Not perfect, just present, just there, when the night pressed too close and the old wounds throbbed in the dark. He had failed at marriage, at fatherhood. At least that's what he told himself in the quieter hours. He had never meant to become a man who measured his days by regret. Yet here he was, trying to comfort a dog whose grief he understood too well, trying to find the right shape for a kindness that was never quite enough. Harper shifted in his sleep, a low whine rising from his chest. His legs twitched, paws scraping gently at the floor as if chasing something in memory. Sawyer watched, heart tight, recognizing the helplessness in that sound. He moved to Harper's side, crouched close, and laid a hand, soft, slow, no pressure, across the shepherd's broad shoulders. Harper tensed, then, after a moment, relaxed into the touch. Sawyer let the silence settle. He didn't speak. Words only scattered the quiet, and there was nothing left to explain. He sat there, listening to the dog's breathing, feeling the warmth of fur under his palm, remembering all the nights he'd spent alone, wishing someone had stayed. When Harper woke, he looked up at Sawyer, not with fear or uncertainty this time, but with a kind of quiet resolve. His gaze drifted to Mr. Dalton, still sleeping, then back to Sawyer. In that look, Sawyer read the question he had been asking himself for days. Was it better to return to the past, to the people and places that shaped you, or to remain in the uncertain peace of the present, building something new out of brokenness? Night bled into morning without decision. When Mr. Dalton woke, the lines on his face were softer, the desperate hope of the day before, tempered by the patience of age. Sawyer brewed a new pot of coffee and let the old man watch Harper from a distance. No one spoke of goodbyes or reunions or the ache that clung to every breath. Instead, they moved through the morning in slow, thoughtful gestures, folding blankets, refilling water bowls, mending the rips in Harper's old collar. Later, as the sky brightened just enough to paint silver on the snow, Sawyer knelt beside Harper once more. The shepherd pressed his nose to Sawyer's knee, then to Mr. Dalton's hand as the old man approached. There was no fear in the dog's movements now, only a solemn acceptance, a willingness to let himself be touched by two men who each carried a share of Claire's memory. Sawyer spoke at last, voice gentle, low. He belongs here now. This is his home, but you can visit as often as you'd like. I won't ever stop you from seeing him. He looked into Mr. Dalton's eyes, searching for understanding, for release from the weight of a choice neither wanted to make alone. He's found some peace here. Maybe we both have. The old man stood silent for a moment, shoulders trembling, eyes shining. He reached out, laying a hand on Harper's head, fingers threading through the dog's thick fur. His voice was soft, unsteady. Thank you. For giving him a place to rest, for letting him stay. Claire would have wanted that. The storm outside faded into a light flurry, sunlight catching the swirling snow and setting it aglow. Inside, the world felt warmer somehow, the air less brittle, the ache less sharp. Sawyer helped Mr. Dalton into his coat and walked him to the door. They stood on the porch, breathing the cold, bracing air, not quite ready to part. Take care of him, Mr. Dalton said, squeezing Sawyer's arm before descending the steps. Sawyer nodded, words caught in his throat. Harper watched from the window, head tilted, ears pricked, not anxious, not afraid, just aware, present, waiting. When Sawyer returned inside, he found Harper sitting by the radiator, tail thumping once against the floor. Sawyer sank to the ground beside him, legs folded, hands loose in his lap. Harper leaned into his side, sighing, a long, unburdening sound, neither joy nor sorrow, but the letting go of something held too long. They stayed there together as the sun slipped higher, letting the hours unspool, letting the pain and hope and memory twist together into a quiet peace. There were no perfect endings, just the simple, stubborn act of staying, of being enough for each other, in the space left behind. In the days that followed, the hush of winter settled gently around Sawyer's small rented house at the edge of the pines. Bar Harbor breathed beneath its snow, mornings blue and glassy, evenings cast in gold and lilac. The world had shrunk to the size of this quiet town, and the slow, silent choreography of two beings learning how to belong again. Sawyer's life filled with new rhythms. He woke before dawn, standing at the frosted window with a mug warming his palms, watching the darkness lift off the pines. Harper would wander from the foot of the bed, never in a rush, always pausing to stretch, to nose the blanket, to check that Sawyer was still there. Sometimes, as the first pale sun bled into the room, Sawyer caught himself smiling at the sight. The dog's tail swishing softly, the red scrap still clutched in his jaws, as much a part of him as his scars. Their days unfolded in quiet acts of trust. Sawyer would gather Harper's leash but rarely needed it. The shepherd kept close, walking beside him down the icy roads to the harbor, or along the edge of the woods where only bird calls and distant wind broke the silence. Sawyer discovered how much could be said in a look, in the gentle tap of a muzzle against his hand, in the way Harper would pause at every crossroads and wait for him to catch up. Sometimes, on days when Sawyer's heart ached with the ache of missing his daughter, he'd take out his phone and snap photos of Harper in the snow, Harper nosing at driftwood, Harper curled on the rug soon. He sent them quietly, no explanation, just images, to his ex-wife, who would show them to their little girl. In return, sometimes a reply would come, a message in clumsy kid spelling, a drawing of a stick-figure dog, or a question. Does Harper like pancakes too? There were moments of return to the world too. One afternoon, Sawyer and Harper stopped by Maple and Tide. The old bakery was warm and fragrant, the bell on the door jangling softly as Sawyer stepped in. Mrs. Whitaker, white-haired and brisk, leaned over the counter, her hands dusted with flour. She smiled down at Harper, who waited quietly at Sawyer's feet, eyes bright and steady. "You brought your friend today," she said, voice gentle. "I think I have something for him." She disappeared into the back and returned with a paper bag, carefully folded, warm with the smell of oats and honey. "I made these myself," she whispered, sliding a biscuit into Harper's waiting mouth. "He looks like he's been through a war and come out kind." Harper chewed slowly, savoring every crumb, tail sweeping the floor. Life became a series of these small, holy rituals, the taste of strong coffee in the morning, the feel of Harper's fur beneath Sawyer's hand, the hush of the woods after snowfall. Some nights, when the wind rattled the windows and loneliness crept in, Sawyer would light a fire and write in his old, battered journal. Not confessions, just sketches of memory. A note about the way the light caught Harper's face, the sound of the dog dreaming beside him, the soft weight of a head on his knee. He found himself saving scraps for Harper's collection. Old towels, the edge of a woolen sock, a button from his daughter's sweater. But always, it was the red cloth Harper returned to, arranging it carefully beneath his chin before sleep, carrying it with him from room to room. It was no longer a shield, just a piece of the past that had become safe to keep. Sawyer learned to listen to Harper's silences, the way the shepherd would sometimes lift his head at a sudden noise, eyes alert but no longer afraid, how he slept more deeply, legs twitching as if chasing joy, not fear, How, on certain mornings, he would bring the red cloth and drop it in Sawyer's lap, an unspoken invitation to be part of whatever peace he'd found. The world outside thawed and froze again. But within the walls of that little house, the wounds, though not forgotten, slowly healed. Sawyer's guilt softened in the face of Harper's trust, and Harper's old vigilance faded in the steady rhythm of Sawyer's care. Sometimes Sawyer caught himself humming, snatches of lullabies he once sang to his daughter, songs of homecoming and forgiveness. And sometimes, when Harper curled up beside him, Sawyer found himself believing, not in perfection, but in the simple goodness of being enough for each other. The days slipped by, not remarkable, but cherished. No miracles, no thunderous revelations, just the warmth of bread shared in a quiet kitchen, the click of claws on the floor, the slow return of sleep and trust. In Bar Harbor's winter quiet, two beings, scarred, ordinary, hopeful, had learned, at last, how to stay. The last days of winter in Bar Harbor arrived with the hush of a hymn, clear sunlight trembling over the harbor ice, gulls circling lazily overhead, the scent of salt and spruce traveling down empty lanes. The world outside Sawyer's window seemed, for once, in no hurry to move forward. It was a season that encouraged stillness, and Sawyer found himself grateful for it. On one such morning, Sawyer woke before dawn to find the house silent and blue. He brewed coffee in the kitchen, the mug warming his hands as he gazed out toward the pines, the sky just beginning to blush at the edges. Harper was already awake, sprawled on the living room rug, the red scrap of scarf tucked beneath his chin, tail thumping quietly as Sawyer entered. They moved through their morning with an ease that felt almost sacred. No words needed, only gestures. Harper waiting at the door, Sawyer bundling into his coat, the two of them stepping out into the cold together. The snow crunched beneath their boots and paws as they walked the winding trail toward the shore. The silence deepened only by the distant call of seabirds. Down at the beach, the tide was out, leaving long swaths of frozen sand laced with driftwood and shells. The winter sun glanced off the surface of the water, 1,000 tiny fires flickering across the ice. Sawyer stood with his hands in his pockets, watching Harper wander ahead, nose close to the ground, tail high and loose. Occasionally the shepherd glanced back, as if to check that Sawyer was still there. Sawyer found a flat, smooth stone and skipped it across the thin crust of ice at the water's edge. He watched it bounce twice, then disappear with a soft clatter. Harper, curious, padded over and nudged Sawyer's leg, then flopped down beside him, head resting on Sawyer's boot, eyes half closed in contentment. There was no need for conversation. In that quiet, wind tangling through the pines, waves tapping gently at the shore, the weight of old sorrows felt lighter, as if the world itself had exhaled. Sawyer felt it in his bones, the ache that had so long kept him from rest, now replaced by a soft, unfamiliar peace. He sat down in the sand, brushing aside a patch for Harper, who quickly curled up beside him. The shepherd's breathing was deep and slow, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of a creature who had finally allowed himself to belong. Sawyer placed a hand on Harper's side, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath layers of fur and muscle and healed wounds. The day drifted by in small rituals. Back home, Sawyer dried Harper's paws and hung his coat by the door. He wrote a short email to Mr. Dalton in Vermont. Just a few lines, but filled with truth. Harper is at peace here. He still keeps Claire's scarf, but he doesn't hide behind it anymore. He sleeps deeply, walks bravely, and greets each morning like it's the first. You're always welcome to visit. We're both learning to stay. He attached a photograph. Harper curled by the fire, eyes bright, the red scrap nearby. He added another, a shot from the beach, sunlight gilding the shepherd's fur, the ocean stretching out behind them, limitless and blue. As evening approached, Sawyer prepared dinner. Nothing fancy, just a roast chicken and potatoes. He saved the best scraps for Harper, who waited by the stove, tail swishing across the floor. Afterward, Sawyer stretched out on the couch, Harper climbing up to rest his head on Sawyer's lap, sighing with the deep, bone-weary contentment of someone who has stopped running. The fire flickered, painting their shadows on the walls. Sawyer reached for the small wooden box he kept on the mantel, opening it to retrieve the strip of red fabric, now soft and faded with time. He hung it gently on the wall, right beside a photo of Harper on the shore, and a new note written in Sawyer's careful, slanting hand. We don't need to be perfect, just kind enough to stay. The words lingered in the air long after the pen was set down, weaving themselves into the quiet. Sawyer stared at the wall for a long time, his heart settling, letting the meaning of those words anchor him. Some nights, loneliness still circled, but it no longer bit as sharply. The house no longer felt empty. Even the silence was different, full, not hollow. Sometimes, when sleep was slow to come, Sawyer would listen to the sound of Harper breathing nearby, steady and sure. A lullaby written in patience and grace. There was no ending here, not really. Just the gentle persistence of life moving forward. Two souls, marked by loss, mended by time and small acts of care, holding space for each other in the wide, quiet world. Sometimes, Sawyer thought, the real miracle wasn't dramatic or loud. It was this: waking up to the same pair of brown eyes, the same thumping tail, the same stubborn everyday hope that today and tomorrow and the next day, they would both choose, again and again, to stay. Outside, winter slowly loosened its hold. The first hints of spring crept in with the morning breeze, and in the little house at the edge of the woods, Sawyer and Harper lay side by side, the hush of healing and the promise of belonging lingering, like the ocean's breath, long after the tide had turned. When winter's silence finally gave way to spring, two scarred souls in Bar Harbor had learned something most of us spend a lifetime chasing. Home isn't built on perfection. It's made of second chances, quiet forgiveness, and the courage to stay, even when it hurts. Sawyer and Harper didn't erase each other's pain. Instead, they chose, every single day, to be gentle with what was wounded and to love what was left. In that silent decision, a miracle happened, not with thunder, but with small acts of care, trust, and hope. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever found healing in a place or with a soul you least expected? Do you believe in the quiet miracles that come to those who keep showing up, day after day? Type Amen in the comments if you believe that every scar can become a story of hope. And please share your own moment of healing or second chance below. Your words might be the comfort someone else needs tonight. Thank you for watching, for staying, and for believing in kindness. May you and every soul searching for a home find gentle light on the path ahead.